Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group. 1-800-BEAT-IRS, BeatIRS.com. That's B-E-A-T. IRS, serving Alaskans and Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have online with us Melissa Quinn. Melissa Quinn is a news reporter for the Daily Signal, Heritage's publication arm. She's been a reporter before that for Red Alert, and she is a graduate from the University of Florida. Melissa is going to talk to us a little bit about the troubling world of civil forfeitures in connection, I believe, with criminal cases. Ms. Quinn, welcome back to the Joe Miller Show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us about what's going on in Philadelphia and the concerns that some constitutionalists may have about it.
So in Philadelphia has really become one of the cities in the country that has been most egregious in their use of civil forfeiture, and it has been targeted by a lot of critics of the practice for its use there for law enforcement and the prosecutor's use of civil forfeiture. And essentially what civil forfeiture is, for those who don't know, it's a tool that gives law enforcement the power to seize property. We're talking about cash, cars, and houses if they believe that it's connected to a crime. Now, the problem there is a lot of times people will have their property seized and they're never charged with a crime. So a lot of critics are saying that this is obviously a violation of the Constitution on many levels, and they are pointing to civil forfeiture as sort of one of the cities that has been abusing it.
Well, in fact, when these civil forfeitures they commence, it's required that the respondent, the person whose property has been taken by the municipality, that he or she actually retain counsel or at least know something about the process. So many folk, they just have absolutely no idea how to respond, right?
Absolutely. So what happens in a lot of cases, and I actually spoke with a gentleman in Philadelphia who was fighting the prosecutors, fighting the government for his property. He had $1,500 seized, I believe was the amount. And he got it. He got it from an honest day's work. He had paid, his paychecks to show where the money came from. You are not guaranteed a right to counsel if you, as a property owner, decide to fight civil forfeiture. And what happens in Philadelphia, and this is why a lot of critics have sort of targeted Philly, is because the prosecutors will often work one-on-one with the property owners who are fighting for their property back. They're asking them to fill out complex legal forms that a lot of everyday Americans have no idea what they're signing, what they're supposed to do, and they are not guaranteed a right to counsel. And as you know, if you do go ahead and if you decide to fight the government and retain counsel, hire your own attorney, it can be very expensive and it's a very long process.
I heard about a case, and this was several months ago, about a black guy that boarded, I think it was an Amtrak train, had several hundreds of dollars in his pocket, ended up getting stopped, was subject to civil forfeiture, lost the money. I think he fought it, but he ended up spending more money than when he got back. Obviously a perfectly legitimate guy, probably racially profiled to boot. And, this thing just smells to high heaven. I mean, you've got now municipalities all across the country that are doing the type of thing, though, that Philadelphia is doing, right?
You're absolutely correct, and I know exactly of the case that you're talking about. I believe this gentleman had his money seized in New Mexico, and New Mexico is one of the states that is really leading the way on reforming civil forfeiture. But I've read and interviewed people who have been the victims of this in North Carolina, rural North Carolina, in Cincinnati, Ohio. I mean, this is happening all over the country. So, no, it's not confined specifically to Philadelphia, but there are different aspects of the system that are unique to Philadelphia. But what a lot of critics have called forfeiture policing for profit, that is something that's going on everywhere.
Now, the policing for profit, what you're referring to is when these agencies, municipalities primarily, do these forfeiture actions, they keep the property, assuming that whoever they've targeted doesn't know how to respond and doesn't defend their rights. They end up making money from this, literally. I mean, they get to keep it, use it for, governmental purposes. This is money that expands their general operating revenue, right?
Yes, in a large number of states, the Institute for Justice just put out a report on this, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the federal government, Pennsylvania, for example, law enforcement agencies there are allowed to keep 100% of the proceeds In some states that are reforming civil forfeiture laws, they want to redirect those funds directly into the general fund or at the federal level, in this case, the Department of the Treasury. And you are absolutely correct. Critics have really targeted on, honed in on this profit incentive that they say forfeiture creates, because in many cases, the proceeds from forfeiture go directly into law enforcement coffers. And we're talking as well about how forfeiture dollars are paying the salaries of the very prosecutors who are fighting the property owners and representing the government in these forfeiture cases. There have been so many examples of police officers testifying before city council meetings saying that forfeiture is pennies from heaven. It's a gold mine. So you can see the direct correlation between forfeiture dollars and the profit incentive when agencies get to keep 100% of what they forfeit.
Yeah, and so if it goes to the agency as opposed to like the states or even the municipalities' general operating fund, I mean, that's even more of a motivation to do this type of thing, because many of these smaller agencies, they treat their private budget or their budgets almost like a private domain, their own little slush fund. I mean, there could actually be personal motivation in that they can do that training junket in Hawaii as opposed to, renting a conference room downtown or something. I'm not sure if you've actually traced out anything like that, but I'm sure that does play into this motivation as well, doesn't it?
There have been, just like, when you referenced the conference training in Hawaii, there have actually been examples on record of police departments buying things like a margarita machine with forfeiture dollars. One jurisdiction purchased a Dodge Viper. And the irony there is that the reason why they said that they wanted this Dodge Viper was to teach high school students in the DARE program, so in the drug prevention program. There have been other examples of law enforcement hiring clowns with forfeiture dollars. And yes, some law enforcement agencies, and Philadelphia is one of them, they use forfeiture dollars to buy equipment, computers, vehicles, pay salaries, things like that, things that Americans would argue are for law enforcement purposes. But unfortunately, there have been a lot of examples, buying a margarita machine, of how these dollars are being abused.
So tracing out the history of this, I mean, this really started with federal action, right? I mean, you had the DEA that was seeking forfeiture of items related to drug trade, allegedly. You also, in fact, I heard a story, and this was more recent. I think we put this up on restoringliberty.com, about a business owner who ended up having over $100,000 seized from his account because apparently the IRS saw that there were cash transactions exceeding a threshold amount going in and out of that account, even though his was a cash-based business.
Yes, that's Lyndon McClellan. I've spoken to him multiple times about what he went through. That's a little bit different than what we're talking about is going on in Philadelphia, but it's the same concept. It's the money from his bank account was seized under civil forfeiture laws, but the specific subset of laws that he was, violating, unknowingly violating in the end, are structuring laws, which require or prohibit you from making cash deposits of just under $10,000 into a bank account. And just like you said, Lyndon operated a full cash business. His bank teller actually instructed him to make payments or withdrawals and deposits in this specific sort of amount to avoid them having to fill out additional paperwork to abide by reporting requirements. And the IRS seized over $107,000 from his bank account. He did get it back, though, which is...
That's because sites like ours and probably also the Daily Signal were trumpeting his case, and people got engaged, and the feds were getting a little bit of egg and face on it. But, most folk don't have that opportunity. They don't have that political leverage where they can get people involved and they can, hire counsel. Almost all these cases, though, where you fight the forfeiture, it's going to cost the person or, whoever the entity that had money seized from or property from lots of legal fees, right?
Yes, and you have to think, too, Lyndon had over $100,000 seized. That's a very high dollar amount. You obviously are going to fight for that. But if you have $200 or even $500 seized, I think a lot of property owners end up asking themselves, is thousands of dollars in legal fees worth it for what in the long run may not be that much money in the first place?
Melissa Quinn, news reporter for the Daily Signal, reporting on the forfeiture problem specifically in Philadelphia and beyond. It's an issue that should trouble any constitutionalist. Property should not be seized without the due process of law. It shouldn't be done on a technicality and done in ways that the average person isn't able to fight. Appreciate, Melissa, you bringing people's attention to this and addressing the problem through your columns.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. We'll be right back after this.